sharing some ideas on the significance of the private actor. And first, I would like, before I get into the core of the paper or the main ideas I want to convey with the presentation, I would like to say make some preliminary remarks to put some framework into the ideas. First of all, the core ideas of this presentation belong to a larger project, which is a monograph on the relationship of between torts and retribution that is embedded in punitive damages. Hopefully out this year or beginning of the next. Let's see. Doesn't depend on me exactly, right? It depends on the timing of the press. But hopefully we can have opportunities to discuss this further later. But so this is just to say that the bulk of my research agenda in the last year has been focused on devising a relational retributive reconstruction of punitive damages that is inclusive of the victim's perspective. And so this is what explains my focus on trying to elucidate the significance of the private actor in torts, and also my reference to punitive awards as examples that I think can illuminate the importance of this aspect. And so basically what the project is trying to do is to advance a contextual and interdisciplinary approach to torts by integrating insights from cognitive science and social psychology to better understand the substance of the victim's perspective. And so the selection of this particular methodology comes from two dissatisfactions that one has to do with the polarizing trajectory of the tort theory debate, which originally presented a structure and function as opposing poles, as if they were incompatible. The second dissatisfaction is with thinking about tort law and victim as if they exist in a vacuum or in isolation from the substance of their responses to wrongdoing and from the broader context in which wrongdoing happened. And so what I try to do is to move away from the structure-function dichotomy by showing instead a subtler interplay between structure and function, and also to show that integrating and striving to understand the victim perspective is worthwhile, in that victims are essential elements that complete the picture in the relationship between defendant and plaintiff. And so the idea is basically to offer a more holistic approach to what it means to be wrong and what holding others accountable entails. And so lastly, in these preliminary remarks, I would say that implicit in this line of argument that I'm interested in are three elements. First, the blurring of the private-public divide. I see more interactions, intersections, and overlaps than pure distinctions. Second, an attempt to close the gap between law and emotions, or law and intuitive judgment. And there, what I would like to is to overcome the fear of giving room to intuitive motivations or to emotions without advocating that the law should blindly follow emotions or intuitions. And the third implicit element is a pluralistic account of tort law. So the fact that I am interested in looking at the substance of the victim's perspectives to wrongdoing open up a path for the identification and exploration of the plurality of competing values that surface in the articulation of tort law and its process. So let me get into the core of the ideas. So because my focus is on understanding the significance of the private actor in torts, what I do is I start by identifying the available dominant depictions of the private actor advanced by functionalist and structuralist accounts of tort. And so in a very simplified way, we can say that functionalist accounts of tort law depict the private actor as a contingent agent who instrumentally contributes to wealth maximization by assuming a kind of enforcement role. And so under this reconstruction, the victim advances a public interest which is external to her. And the wrongdoer-victim relationship is contingent in the sense that it is mediated by this ultimate goal of achieving efficiency. And so this contingent actor depiction correlates very well with a market-oriented idea of tort litigation. That means whomever is in the best position to litigate should do so. No? The idea of third-party litigation goes on that line. And so the private actor is basically understood as a rational agent who means that any other motivation, apart from efficiency or wealth maximization, the victim may have for pursuing damages awards through tort law is considered in principle misguided, irrational, or mistaken, and in need of some sort of correction. On the other hand, conversely, structuralist accounts of tort law understand the private actor as a necessary element of the bilateral structure that determines this normative structure of tort law as private law. And under this reconstruction, the victim advances a private interest, which is internal to her. And so the victim seeks private rectification or private redress for the wrong done to her by the wrongdoer. And so this depiction is well entrenched in right-based approaches to tort law, broadly understood, and civil recourse theory as well. And so rights-based approaches assume that what the victim ultimately wants is private rectification by arguing that tort law places the defendant under the obligation to restore the plaintiff as far as possible to the position the plaintiff would have been in had the wrong not been committed. And so this restoring of the normative equilibrium back is all tort law is about, no? The allocation back idea. So whatever lies beyond restoration to the victim's rightful position is external and thus foreign in principle, foreign to tort. Civil recourse theory offers, this in my reading, offers instead more sensitivity to the victim's perspective by approaching tort law not as a scheme for normatively restoring the equilibrium between defendant and plaintiff, but rather as a mechanism that empowers private individuals to seek private redress for relational wrongs done to them. And so, however, by focusing on the structure and logic of the empowerment, power allocation idea, they end up depicting the victim as detached from the substance of their responses to wrongdoing. So to sum up on these ideas, however different, all these reconstructions of the private actor, which again I offer in a simplified way, in my understanding, they share a commonality. And this commonality is that they are formal and abstract depictions of the private actors in torts that are assumed in order to fit the structure of their own theoretical frameworks rather than empirically explore. And so what I try to do with this project is the latter, to empirically explore them by offering a substantive and contextual depiction of the private actor in torts. And so how this happens? The starting point first is the identification that the victim actually has a central role in the bilateral structure of tort litigation. Is the one who takes the initiative and actively decides to file a lawsuit against the wrongdoer. And so if the victim herself who has the power to subject the wrongdoer to the court's jurisdictional power to issue a reasonable judgment against the defendant. And so following this logic, the proposal is that to look at the correlative motivations of the plaintiff who ultimately decides to exercise her right to initiate a legal proceeding against the particular defendant. And so what are these correlative motivations? So the point is that looking at the victim's motivational compound is worthwhile. Why? Because it offers a different picture of the content of tort responses. And so it tells us that many times torts responses reflect a subtler interplay of private and public interests, whether rectificatory or not. And so these dominant public external or private internal depictions of the private actor are somehow ill-equipped to capture the richness of these much more textured responses that tort victims pursue by engaging tort law and the tort process. And so they cannot capture the moral significance and the situated meaning of the impact of torting wrongs to victims or the complex motivations for seeking redress through tort. The fact that the tort system offers a rationalistic approach that translates injury, pain, suffering, and other intangible harms into sums of money, or it would be like the commodification, in a way, critique of torts, does not necessarily mean that victims solely or even primarily seek monetary compensation in response to wrongdoing inflicted upon them. So without disregarding the need for compensation that many victims have after being wronged, such an assumption misapprehends the tort victim's motivational compound. Tort victims often demand responses that go beyond private rectification. They demand responses that better match the moral wrong by conveying the significance and meaning of the wrongdoing. For instance, they want affirmation of the worth and dignity. They want communication of condemnation of reprehensible behavior. They want a public forum to voice the moral significance of the wrongdoing, to tell their stories, their own narratives, their experience of injury. They want affirmation that justice and equality matters in our society, and so on. So they seek responses that connect the wrongdoer to the victim by acknowledging the particular circumstances of the wrongdoing and their correlative motivations in a more holistic fashion. And so in this, when we think about tort responses, they will depend on the type of tort, whether it has affected property, bodily integrity, dignity, autonomy. Depends on the particular circumstances of wrongdoing, whether it was negligent, intentional, humiliating, outrageous, and depends on the significance of the wrongdoing that the wrongdoing has for the private parties involved. Where lies the moral wrong? How the manner of the defendant interference with the victim's protected interest is connected to the inherent value attributed to them in the particular circumstances of wrong. And so, for instance, if we look at insights from social psychology and cognitive sciences, they tell us that our responses to wrongdoing are different to carelessly inflicted harm than to intentionally inflicted harm. And so here the example of punitive damages might be apt. So when we are confronted with reprehensible behavior that affects incommensurable interests, such as our personal autonomy and individual dignity, we do not seek justification. Instead, what we seek is a response that helps us express our rejection at the gravity of the disregard with which those protected interests were invaded, along with reaffirming our own inherent value and the importance of other regarding interest in our society. And so when we think in that way, in this logic, exploring why victims want the imposition of a sanction, in this example, a punitive award, for the wrongdoing that they experience, direct our attention to the value attributed by the victims to the interests that were invaded by the defendant's wrongful conduct. And so perhaps a better understanding of punitive damages, for instance, arises from asking how we make sense of the circumstances of deliberate, humiliating, outrageous wrongdoing that threatens our personal autonomy, dignity, bodily integrity, or even life. And so other studies show that, for instance, in the medical malpractice context, the main motivation of victims is to get fuller information about their injury and determine accountability. Studies also show that in cases of defamation and invasion of privacy, the main motivations of victims is to be left alone to stop and correct the defamatory message, this idea of the right to be forgot. And so tort victims' responses, from this we can conclude, are complex and textured in that they reflect common sense understanding of other regarding values, which serve as the basic of collective understandings of collective standards of care and behavior. And so the bottom line I want to convey here is that accepting formal private verification or private redress as a satisfactory explanation of the content of tort responses means treating victims' responses as fungible or interchangeable, marginalizing the individual and social importance of articulating distinctive intrinsic motivations, which are elicited according to these different intensities of the wrongdoing and the diverse nature of the interests that are affected. And so this would mean deflecting our attention from how we ought to behave to others to the fungible monetary awards defendants must pay for misbehavior. So moving on this line of thinking, now that I have tried to construct a different, more substantive and contextual understanding of the private actor, this demands thinking about the tort process in a different way, re-signifying the understanding of the judicial tort process. And so a reading of the tort process as a mere instrument to achieve the goal of compensation is not only narrow and reductionist, but mostly misguided, because this has led scholars, for example, to question tort law space in our society, particularly its capacity and effectiveness to provide victims compensation in an all-or-nothing approach, arguing for moving away from tort law towards social compensation funds and alternative compensatory mechanisms. And so the problem I see with these all-or-nothing positions is not only that they are difficult to sustain because they are too much of a simplification of practice in a way, but also that diverts the scholar's attention away from the substantive aspects of the operation of tort law that might actually recommend the institution. And so an alternative reading would be, that is what I'm trying to explore, is that of the tort process as a legitimate institutional avenue for addressing a variety of different responses to wrongdoing that in a way offers a unique approach to the problem of redressing private wrongs. And so, for instance, the tort process gives private parties the opportunity to question each other's behavior in a forum that reaffirms their value as moral equals. The victim has a unique chance to personally convey several distinct messages by filing the tort lawsuit, playing, as I see, a role that is both reactive and proactive. Reactive in that they seek an authoritative declaration of judgments of rights and responsibility in the judicial process, and proactive in that they take part in the public establishment of collective standards of interpersonal behavior. And so by doing that, I see victims infusing tort law with meaning. And so by denouncing the reprehensible wrongdoing, in the case, for example, of punitive damages, victims make clear that her experience of injury cannot be reduced to a mere statistic or an economic consequence living in a complex society. Instead, it depicts the wrongdoing as a personal affront to her value moral equal, infusing tortious events with social and cultural significance and demanding recognition of the relevance of our interpersonal relationships and obligations of care to one another. And so in this way, the tort victims generate substantive meaning of other regarding human interaction, informing legal doctrine and standards with the insights provided by the victim's perspective. For instance, in the case of punitive damages, would be what amounts to reprehensible behavior in that context. And so under this reading, and starting to close the ideas, the tort process becomes what I think it is, an intermediate structure for participation that basically allows victims themselves to engage in the collective construction of the social and cultural significance of what it means to be wrong and what holding the wrongdoer accountable intends. And so this points out to the importance of appreciating the value of lay understandings of care and respect for others, and try to incorporate them in the decision-making. And so the adversarial tort process provides an institutional framework for the production of relevant information and knowledge regarding the particularities of the wrongdoing and the underlying social and cultural conditions that only the tort victim who experiences can properly convey and activate. And so the victim is basically the one who is especially situated to expose the underlying institutional arrangements which facilitated the wrongful behavior. And so what she does is exposes them by requiring the defendant to explain, backed by the jurisdictional power of the court, how the wrong came to pass, and fundamentally, the tort process does this, questions the defendant's behavior. It forces the defendant to justify her behavior to the victim, to explain how and why the wrongdoing took place, and what reason she may have for believing it. So in these clarifications lies the potential of the tort process to uncover information, for example, of public interest, of structural schemes of wrongdoing or other pervasive power dynamics in our society that would otherwise sometimes go unknown or neglected. And so the cases of fraud liability, environmental litigation, asbestos litigation, food litigation, tobacco litigation are good examples of this. Of course, this does not mean to say that the adversarial tort process is perfect or ideal. It indeed has a lot of documented disadvantages. It's costly, time-consuming, affects victims, it's limited in the measures that can be offered, among many others that we can think about. But my point is distinct, is that there is something unique about the articulation of tort law that other available mechanisms cannot provide, and that it makes tort law a valuable complement to regulation and legislation. And so the fact that any victim can activate it, and once the victim files a lawsuit, the judge is duty-bound to provide an answer, is a powerful aspect of tort law that recommend. We can discuss, if you want, in the exchange, the problems I see with the alternative mechanisms, which are basically the depersonalization of the private actor and the privatization of the company. No? The fact that the less tort law we have, the more our rights and remedies are being redefined and controlled by entirely private actors. In any case, I'm closing. The ultimate point is that as a community, we should devote more efforts in thinking how to improve the operation of tort law and its process, rather than simply replacing it or moving away from it, because it offers an important complement in the functioning of our democratic society. And I think, thanks for your attention. I stop there. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm gonna change your microphone. All there was a couple of developments in the United States that have really put the sort of public-private interface of tort law and other private law in spotlight. One of them was a really rather central aspect of the Me Too phenomenon, and it was that this was epitomized by Harvey Weinstein. He brought it to a level of perfection never seen before, but it was generic. It was that the power to settle private lawsuits privately was a way of keeping them hidden from public view. It was, you know, he practically had his entire firm working in a coordinated way to make sure that he would settle cases with his victims and the story would never get out. And there's a kind of absolutely pervasive feature of American tort law there, which is defendants will settle, and it's not just in that highly charged context. It's every bit as much the case with respect to toxic substances or autonomous vehicles or almost anything you can find. They will settle cases when they conclude that the public significance of the case is clearly bad for them. They'll pay a premium to settle, and they will completely defeat the sort of public-facing side of tort law, and they'll defeat it by using the mechanism that's ultimately up to the plaintiff to settle the case. And I kind of wonder if your view doesn't, so my first question is, I kind of wonder if your view doesn't require that to go. Maybe that's my only question, but my second example is, there have also been prominent cases that are the interface of private law rights and social justice. There's a major one in Los Angeles involving actual reparations for racial injustice involving a beach called Bruce's Beach that the city of Los Angeles simply took from a Black family by eminent domain probably about 100 years ago. And they took it, and the family lost title to it, but you can figure out who the family and the heirs were. And there was a long negotiation recently over it. And when the heirs got it, there was a moment when, I forget exactly how this got resolved, there was a moment when they turned around and they said, wait, we're not going to sell it for 20 million. And they were backed by a whole bunch of progressive activists who wanted the beach to be a public monument of sorts. And it was a classic contrast between, well, it's yours, it's property, it's your private property. You're going to do anything with private property, it's a display of it as you see fit. But if you want to realize the public message for it, you don't want it disposed of, just sent to the highest bidder. You want it to be turned into a kind of public beach that's also a monument to, or a counter monument to something, a bad moment in American history and local history and so on. And so the private power to settle is again sort of central there. It's another one involving Harvard University with a descendant of a slave who was photographed very humiliating, naked and without their consent, to say the least, by Louis Agassiz, who was the second most famous biologist of the 19th century. Darwin was the first. But Agassiz was a really famous defender of racial inferiority in blacks, and he had a very early fleshed daguerreotypes of slaves, and they were using them as specimens. Someone recognized that as their ancestor and brought suit against Harvard, and went all the way to Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, which decided it was going to be a negligent infliction of emotional distress claim, which I think was mostly designed to bring Harvard back to the bargaining table. But that too presents this conflict between the private mechanism and the public meaning, because there's a way in which you get a hold of those pictures. You can sell them for a lot these days. There are people who want to collect, but somehow what we want with respect to those photographs is a different form of public memorialization of what they signify. Anyway, two long examples for maybe a simple question, which is, what do you think about a private power of settlement? Is it an impediment to your view?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first, I would say I have nothing against settlement, and but I think we have to get into what settlement means, and then we can. So you have completely entirely private settlement that are completely privatized, in the sense that I was mentioning at the very end, where you can see that rights are being defined completely by private corporations. So this happens a lot in consumer context. And so this kind of settlements would be problematic because they are not only depersonalizing, that they are actually doing away with the idea of meaning that I think the whole process brings, and the idea of the public discourse, the public meaning of this other regarding values or understandings. But also this privatization, I think it is worrisome in a way. So these kind of settlements, completely private settlements, would wouldn't fit. Then you have the kind of settlements that I think go more in line of your question, that had to do with the powers that private actors have in the tort process. And so, because the victim is the one that is initiating the tort process, but also is the one who has to continue it and see it to the end, or settle if it sees fit. And so I think I don't have too much problem with that power of private settlement, in the sense that there is some judicial overview of this kind of settlement, there is some counterbalance of the power dynamic. It could be that there is, in a context of a litigation where there is a power imbalance or a power asymmetry, but the fact that it has some public dimension because it is happening in the tort process, it has some judicial overview, then I don't think this would be problematic. So I would to your question, the answer would be, it depends in which context this power is being used. And when privatization or depersonalization is completely undertaken, then it would be problematic. If not, it wouldn't, and maybe there is some refinement there to be done in the understanding of what losing completely the depersonalization or what privatization actually means. So I think it's a great point to explore more and refine. But this would be, I don't know if it is satisfying.
So I actually want to thank you for your paper. I want to follow up on your response to Greg's question. I was going to ask a less informed version of Greg's question, but I'm now better informed. So I want to hear more about the way in which you're conceptualizing personalization here. And one way of bringing that out is to think about the beach in Los Angeles example, because there, on the one hand, is something deeply personal and humiliating about what happened. And so you might say, oh, well, so that should really be the content of the appropriate remedy. But there's another way of thinking about it that says that what's depersonalizing about it is that the ancestors who owned this beach were treated not as ordinary people with ordinary rights of property owners, because eminent domain was exercised and then it was, I take it, just sold to somebody else because that's what they wanted to be. And so the depersonalization doesn't seem to be understandable, or it can be understood in two different ways. On the one hand, there's a kind of element of insult to it. And on the other hand, there is an element of not having standing as fully fledged right holder. And those seem to lead to quite different views of what the appropriate remedy would be. And so that's one version of it. But I also have a further question about settlements, which connects up with the way in which you're drawing on social psychology, because you say that social psychologists and studies show that most people sue because, and then you say because they're outraged and so on. And certainly when I teach torts, I always kind of represent the plaintiff as outraged. But of course, I never teach cases that have settled. Settled. I only, HLA Hart observes that when you go to law school, you study appellate cases. All appellate cases are pathological because they're the ones that couldn't simply be resolved clearly with doctrine. The least pathological cases are the ones that settle, where both sides can see kind of where the doctrine is pointing. But the question is, in what sense is outrage central to the operation, as opposed to something that only manifests itself in these pathological cases? There are, in Toronto, there are lawyers who are known as the lawyer you go to if you're not willing to settle, no matter how good a deal you get. It's for people who are just angry at each other. A friend of mine was a lawyer in Greece briefly, and he acted in an unjust enrichment case for a shipping magnate who had given $100 million to his son-in-law, and then the marriage dissolved. And so he demanded repayment, whether it was gift or whether it was a loan. And so, here you have it, it's really about outrage. It's just not clear there are victims here. Because each of them were billionaires, and it was just, and that seems like a really pathological case. And the question is whether, to understand our law as we have it, we should be focusing on this. Because of course there's some things that really outrage us. But again, I'm just kind of interested in the analytical question.
Thank you. Well, regarding the thank you for the questions. I don't think I have answers to all, but I will try. Regarding the first point about depersonalization, I would say that is a good example, because I mean, what I was thinking originally as depersonalization is the fact that if victims don't have this avenue, this institutional avenue for expression, what we are losing as a society is the rich moral insight that the victim's perspective brings into the discussion. And so I was more thinking in your comment on the insult part of the ideas, I want words, but now I can see that in the standing element, you could perhaps also construct this idea, because there is an insight there to be drawn from the idea that, well, I don't have a standing to protect the property and so on. And so I'm not that sure that these are such different understandings of depersonalization, that maybe think further about it. But in a more umbrella, broader understanding that I had in mind, I think I could probably explain these two facets. I don't know if it is satisfactory or not, but I think it could be something there. But basically, I am worried about losing the meaning of this kind of that happens in the thought process. This idea of the meaningless role of the victims is what I am talking about. And this is what worries me about having such a few thought actions. You're totally right, and especially in the American context, most of the cases are settled, right? And so that's why you cannot find a lot of examples when the outrage is done in a different way. So they go all the way because there is something else in this kind of case, right? And so I'm not so much thinking of this particular kind of cases. That is more, it sounds more like a personal, just outrage, focused litigation with just the goal to defeat the other party just because I'm rich and I can. I am thinking more of genuine reactions to reprehensible wrongdoing. And while I go to social psychology, and this is of course a question that I get very often, it's not of course it's not such idiosyncratic in a way. It's because I am interested in looking at what are the correlative motivations. Because when you as a victim decide to file a lawsuit, you are getting into something that is costly, time-consuming, and so on. And it could even harm you at the end. No? It could be like draining and emotionally affecting you and so on. So there has to be something else to be able to want to do that. And that's why I wanted to explore the idea of basically there are two retributive motivations I'm interested in. One is moral outrage and the other is trial aversion. But basically trying to understand whether there is a relation there to be looked at, when a victim activates a total lawsuit motivated that towards the defense. So this is what I mentioned at the beginning, the relational idea. And so I'm trying to connect why would you want to sanction reprehensible behavior. And these are motivations that are very powerful in that regard. But again, I'm not thinking of emotions in that way. No, I don't think these insights provide that. They provide much more, a much more thicker understanding of these creativity motivations that actually points to the value. I am outraged because I value my autonomy, my physical integrity, and you are not allowed to diminish me or to humiliate me or to put your interest ahead of mine. And there has to be an answer for that. This is what I'm having in mind. But because for many, going to social psychology is not convincing. We can also think of moral philosophy, like reactive attitudes are one explanation of that, the attitude of resentment, for example. And so I think there are other explanations that point in the same direction, that they are not only focused on things like psychology or psychology. I don't know if I answer. Yeah, more or less. I feel I missed something. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these very interesting ideas. Like Greg and Arthur, I'm very sympathetic to your thesis and do not mean that this reaction as critical or hostile. There are two countervailing considerations that might interest you, maybe not. And I think they derive from your interest in punitive damages or the punitive increment of damages, where you take for granted the rightness of the claim at some preliminary level. Is it possible, or let me back up, do you think that the reform or the shift that you have in mind needs to worry about claims that are bad in some way, dishonestly pled or unsound or misplaced? I'm not very interested in that. I think forensics take care of dealing with bad claims, but I did wonder what you think about the idea of treating like cases alike, whether you value that as a goal, because it seems to me that the more we listen to and defer to the victim's perspective of an injury, the more likely it becomes that awards or judgments will be inconsistent with one another at some level.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, I would say, of course, I mean, arguing for more personalization and for a more individual basis attention or perspective could lead to what you're mentioning. But I wonder when this is so worrisome or not, because at the end of the day, Torts is case by case, right? I mean, what we do with that, we look at the impact when we think about damages, when we look and we have to quantify damages, we look at the impact of the victim. And of course, victims are different, impact will be different. So maybe, I mean, I would think about that, but I'm not sure is that worrisome, that distinction. But I want to clarify something about the victim's perspective, because not to say like, well, whatever the victim wants has to be granted, right? Of course not. It's just that I think that getting into the substance of the victim perspective, let us think in a better way, or what I think is in a better way, or let us to a better understanding of thought. This is what I was saying at the beginning when I reacted to Greg's comment, in the sense that I'm actually interested in pushing this assumption of rectification. And so I want to understand why we keep having Torts rather rectifying, but we keep having it, we see value in this, and I want to know what is that value. And for that, I think victims provide something that has been underexplored in scholarship and in the theory in general, that it points to substance, it points to values, and it points, I think, to a better understanding of why we have talked about all. And maybe the importance of Torts is on these more marginal exceptional cases, and not on the vast majority of cases. And I want to be open to that possibility as well. But thanks for your points. I will think further. Diego.
Thank you, María, for the presentation. Really a lot. Have just two questions, maybe, and one mark. The first is a methodological question. I don't see exactly how you overcome or you just break this dichotomy between internal, external. As I read your project, sounds like a constructive interpretation. You are trying to see which values make sense of the total we have. We try to see how these values fit the practice. This is constructive interpretation. And I will place constructive interpretations on the side of internal theories. They're concerned with the values, how we understand things, all the conceptual apparatus has to be respected. It's distorted that we cannot see the value in it. So I would say that your project is more aligned, even though you place some weight on some other functions, public functions of the law. The main lines of the project, I understand it as internal. The second, comment is why it's important to pay attention to what victims want. Why victims could be completely misleading. They could be expressing kind of sentiments or emotions that in a civilized society we should leave aside. So, outrage. I feel that. Something in Spain, I was one of the victims of an electricity company that overcharged the consumers. So I get a bill of 1,000 euros for 1 month. Too much. They threatened me to go to court. I talked to other people. Most people didn't get the bill that big, but maybe they got 300 euros, 400 euros, and they paid immediately. I go to court. I'm still waiting for the judge to decide. And I'm really outraged. But at the end, they don't want punitive damages. I just want them to be sanctioned. It doesn't matter. But it is just for current deterrence purposes. I don't mind about this is outrageous. It's not my main motivation. But if I have this motivation, maybe it's not the loss function to satisfy. Maybe it's not. Maybe the loss function is leave aside those motivations and just observe the fact that they are taking advantage of consumers writ large and implement some administrative procedures to control and to impose sanctions. I would be happy with that. So why is it so relevant to see what the victims want? Victims want unjustified things. And the last question is, don't you think that the thesis is too broad? Because maybe even if you have plausible answers, that I know that you have, I've read some of your papers, and I think that the argument for punitive damages is compelling. Not completely convinced yet, as you know, I'm struggling with it. I'm not completely, but I'm more convinced before reading the paper. So I'm more close to your view about how can we integrate the part of punitive damages in interpersonal justice, interpersonal justice. Not completely convinced, but I see the point. See what the argument is. But this is not maybe the general justification for tort law, because in most tort law cases there is not something. There is no reason to be for outrage. And I have a car accident. You break my left leg. Okay, the insurance will take care of it. Even if it's a private matter and if the insurance pays, then you will have to pay to me. We still connected, but it's not to be outraged for that, right? So maybe the thesis, even if you have plausible answers for the previous remark, only is confined to understanding punitive damages, but not the general idea of tort law, the bilateral structure of law, why it's important to keep tort law and not replace it with a compensation funds. For that, you need a different account, more like grave science, fine grave, or civil recourse. I think that. That's it. Thank you.
I'm thinking while you're talking. First, I want to, before I get into all of the answers, I want to say, I think I mentioned one of the ideas that is in the line of argument is this attempting to close it up between law and emotions and law and intuitive judgment. And yeah, I mean, very often I get this kind of reaction, that why emotions, now we put the name outrage, but emotions are broader than that, right? But so why emotions are important, why we should be looking at what the victims want, because in the very end, they want a lot of things, they could want many things at the same time, and they didn't change the amount of what they wanted and so on. And so, but my problem with that is, fair enough, but I think that the law is missing a lot with treating law and emotions as opposing poles. And I think there is some value into looking at emotions and to see when there is a mismatch between law and emotions, which mismatches matter and which does not. And we have to make that decision. And so when we think about the punitive litigation, I mean, most of the cases, I mean, I don't know of any punitive litigation that you can say, no, this is not, there is nothing here. I mean, I don't know if you know of a frivolous one, even the mad coffee, that is the paradigmatic coffee, that is the paradigmatic representation of the frivolous punitive lawsuits, it turned out that it has some. And so, this on one hand, this means that the tort process has mechanisms to control emotions or intuitions, outrage, or whatever you want to call it. And so I'm not worried at that. To me, that is an explanation of why victims decide at all to activate the tort process in these kind of cases. But this doesn't mean that, yeah, whenever it's outrage, we should just go to tort and well, this is not what I am advocating. And so I see a value on that for what I just said. I think we are missing a lot if we are just disregarding emotions just because we think they could be dangerous or they could lead us to problematic answers to this kind of case. Then, when you explain your case, when you said you want to sanction, what you want is beauty damages. This is what beauty damages are all about. You want to communicate a message of condemnation to the corporation that is abusing consumers and charging over that. If this, that's the thing, for example, of the Johnson & Johnson litigation in the US, citizens are still filing lawsuits when they know they're not going to get a penny. They're not going to get $1 out of it because Johnson & Johnson tricked it through the bankruptcy. And so why they keep suing it? Because they want accountability, because they want some sort of sanction / deterrence, whatever you want to call it. And so when you say, yeah, I want sanction, but actually I want to deter them, why not? This is the whole point of beauty damages, no? Where we draw the line between sanction and deterrence in a way that what I'm interested in actually is exactly that, in looking at the interaction between sanction and deterrence. I don't think we can think in only sanction terms or only in deterrence terms in this kind of case, but how these two interact. And so to see whether I can go a step further and see if I can convince you a little more, I see in the victims two elements. It's not only a retributive element, but a recognition element. And this recognition element is your idea of, I want to affirm my value as a consumer, right? You can just come and send me a bill of $1,000 for nothing. And I want to stand by it. And I want to recognize my inherent value as such. And so there is a recognition element that comes together, as I see it, with the retributive element. And this recognitive element, I don't know if makes easier the retributive one, but hopefully it does. Because it tells you, well, I want the position of assumption because I want to affirm my right as a moral equal towards the other party. And for that, the thing that I can do is ask the position of assumption. And then I have a whole process that has mechanisms to control that my outrage is not out of place. And that it has been reprehensible behavior in the trial and so on. Punitive lawsuits are not different. That's why there are few of them in a way. I mean, it's not that you don't have mechanisms to control that. And even in the US, in terms of quantification, this is the clear case from the 5 billion jury awards, they never stand, right? And so at the very end, also the problem of quantification. The private public. Huh? Public private. The methodology, right? Yes, because I think, I mean, I am advocating for a mixed understanding, private public in a way, and I don't think I need to fit in civil courts or corrective justice or in any other theory of tort law, of course, theory of peace damage. But I disagree that this doesn't allow me to push the understanding of tort litigation and or compensation funds and settlements and all that. I don't see what you mean by that point. Because I mean, actually what I'm trying to do is to show that these theories cannot justify actually. In fact, this is what they do. I mean, civil recourse in the last version, they just don't say nothing about this. There are many reasons, I think, for that, but basically they don't want to get into the legitimate mess, basically, right? And
one thing for clarification.
yeah.
You think that the distinction internal externalists is not useful, or that are both useful? You need
I think they're both.
I
I think they're both useful.
Okay.
Actually,
I took it as
that's why I mentioned private public and mean internal external. I mean, I think they're both useful, and I actually resort to both in order to come up with a mixture of both in a way. But I would say private public is more than internal external. But yeah, this is what I use in this paper, but it's not what I do.
Guadalupe, thanks for your presentation. I was wondering something more or less the same, Diego. I don't know if as internalist is your real enemy here, because I think in technical life it's controversially one, and I think that is an internalist theory, at least the way I see it. So maybe the problem of your real enemy here is the concept of remedy. Maybe you're assuming that remedy is to go back to the state of affairs that was before the damage. But we can widen the concept of remedy and to include these kind of responses, meaning responses that we're talking about. So that's one question. The second one is about the recognition power of mind. Because I think that you're assuming that when we implement this kind of remedies, punitive damages, these punitive damages made this recognition power in favor to the victim. But I think that money doesn't have this power of this, or doesn't send this message clearly. Because in a very rich tortfeasor case, the very rich tortfeasor may anticipate the payment of punitive damages. And the respect to the victim is not clear in that case, even if he paid punitive damages. So in that kind of cases, it could be better to go with an apology or with some kind of remedies different only money. So that's it.
Well, I didn't know I had an enemy, but I mean, I don't think, I mean, I never thought in terms of having an enemy or a target at all. No, it's funny how you, because I never thought of that yet. And you're right, internal understanding are friends. I don't have, yeah, that's not, there is an enemy, this is clearly not. And exactly this point, I mean, I try not to, what I try to see is to articulate what it is out there. And so I'm trying to provide a reconstruction that identifies the value of internalists and externalists there, and try to show what is the problem, where we go, we understand from a purely externalist understanding or purely internal understanding. And this is something that, of course, I am opposing. I am clearly trying to see the middle grounds. And so I'm trying to close gaps between poles, one, the same structural function, and external law and emotions. And of course, it's a difficult task, because when I'm trying to get into the complex areas of how these visions interact, I'm trying to come up with a new understanding of how I see retribution, punishment, and sanction in Torts. So this for the first comment. For the second, yeah, you have a point. Of course, we're talking about remedies. And so, yes, I have an understanding of remedies that is broader than the verificatory remedies. Yes, I think that not, if we think only of remedies in terms of rectification, we are losing a lot. But I'm not sure about apologies as responses. These I have whether they have a place or not in the kind of purification. So you may have a point there, but the only element I want to mention is that the idea of recognition is not an idea of reconciliation or nothing of the sort. Not only kind of understanding that one reconciliation with victims is not what recognition meant, and sometimes apologies are understood in that line, others not. Yeah, you're the expert. Then we can discuss it. So yeah, that's with apologies. And then the messages of money is what I'm really interested in. I mean, I think that money sends different messages. It's not the same amount of money that you're giving for gratification, that the amount of money that you're giving for behavior. And I think the most vivid examples of this is what's happening, for example, in jurisdictions like Mexico and European jurisdictions that are hiding the punitive element under the umbrella of non-pecuniary damages. And so what you get at the end of the day is an amount of money for compensatory damages that actually harms the punitive element. And of course, there, the message of condemnation, the message of sanction is completely diluted in this kind of case. And so I'm trying to look at this. What are the good reasons to distinguish sanction from compensation? And there, the message of money comes immediately into the picture. Because one of the elements is this, it's an expressive message of money. It's not the same amount of money that you pay the negligent car accident that caused physical injury to the victim than you pay because of the reprehensible behavior that was mentioned, this corporation charging excess. Just to give an example. And this then, the terrorist messages that are different. And so, yeah, the expressive message of money, I think there is much more there, and I think it will develop. And I'm trying to see whether this is justification to do this line between sanction and compensation.
I just wonder, sure how to formulate this, so I've been avoiding this. But I wonder a bit about, I think recognition and outrage can be very different things. Unfortunately, I'm over-influenced here by the fact that when I think of outrage in the United States, I think Donald Trump, who can then spend his entire life being outraged, it's outrageous that he didn't so, but it's also the case that emotion often is something that overwhelms you, and when you're really in the grip of emotion, you've lost control, understandably, and so on. But we wouldn't actually generally tell people, yeah, it's going to take 10 years to litigate, try to stay out of control for all the 10 years. So the litigation is doing some kind of translation. And I think recognition is a very different thing. And I think for you, recognition is the best notion. And you're making me think I didn't understand recognition better because of what you're saying. So I hope I'm just pushing you on a down path you're already going. But the recognition is that money damage award calibrates the seriousness of the misconduct by the defendant. It creates a public record of the seriousness. Like even if it's reduced, it doesn't really matter because what the media is fascinated by is the fact that it's $5 million to begin with. They're not going to report the reduction. That's really boring. And so it's the creation of this, and it's the fact that you'll get this kind of attention and there will be a public signaling that that's the really important thing from your point of view.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm connecting with Diego's example again. Thank you. And I think of the idea of recognition in a slightly different way. That it has to do with the idea that you as the victim, you are the one who has the power to subject the defendant to the sanction, to the imposition of the sanction from the judge, right? And so this is the idea of recognition, the fact that you can be the one who can change the state of affairs. Diego is the one who can change the state of affairs by filing the lawsuit. This is the idea of recognition, affirming her value as we're equal. The fact that, okay, you can do that to me, and what I can't do is file a lawsuit to change your behavior, to sanction your behavior. We can discuss the motivations, but this is basically the idea of recognition that I have in mind.
Which is the different standard?
Well, good question. It's because I don't talk about standing, but power. And so there, I think there is a distinction between the standing and power. And so the idea of recognition comes connected to the idea of power. The idea that you can subject the defendant to the jurisdictional power of the court. And then what it comes out from the punitive damages is the new debts that they owe to you, that before didn't exist. That because you activated that, then it comes to exist as such. And also the idea of whether this is the right, the power is the right or not, because the idea of the standing is based on the idea of having rights. And I think there is a distinction, important distinction there between having the right to impunity but the power. So when I'm more arguing for the power to be given, in the sense that the court has not has not the duty to grant you, but yes, to consider your claim and see whether this is the case. And so there is a distinction here between the standing and power. Not completely. Is that to the recognition?
That all makes. Yeah, I was just thinking about power. I was thinking about power. I think that is a very nice way of putting it, because what you're doing is exercising power, returning the wrong done to you with some. Virtually his favorite case that feels like our case, but it's that the money, the size of the money award doesn't seem to be about the exercise of power. It seems to be about the marking expressively of how bad the conduct is. I think you want that too.
Yeah, a proportionality of sanction. Yeah. Yeah, one thing is the recognition of the power, and the other thing is how much for, how much for the sanction. And their proportionality comes into the view because they're talking about sanctioning and retribution.